Okay, today on the workbench we've got a very unusual toy. It says Earth Satellite on here. As you can see, it's got propellers on top and a long cable that connects to this gun shape with a crank on it. Now, we're going to talk about the repair, and we're going to talk about how to fix it possibly. I have the gun basically apart on purpose so that we can do this. First, here's the crank piece, and you can actually see that it's physically bent. This metal is so strong that I can't even straighten that with pliers. I'm going to have to take it out to the vise to straighten that. This gear is in pretty good shape. But this gear, trying not to damage this part while I'm keeping this part in frame. The wire is very stiff. The crank gear that you just saw is going to fit the end of that shaft into that little hole and goes behind that gear and interfaces. See back there? The problem, the brass gear back there has all of the teeth basically worn off. Now this crown gear and that brass gear, of course, are joined together as one, are sitting loose on this post, which is hammered there, and there's nothing retaining them on this side other than the fact that this crown gear is connected to this gear on this brass sleeve, so it can't come forward. But that also means in order for me to get that gear out of here to try to replace that worn out brass gear on the back, which means I'd have to try to solder on a brass gear to take the place of that one, I gotta have this out of the way. So now we're getting to the unusual part of this toy. Most of you are familiar with toys that are on a cable control, whereas normally this outside part here is the stationary wire wound tube part, and on the inside there would be a metal shaft that spins. Well, in this one it's exactly the opposite. The metal shaft that's on the inside is very stiff, comes all the way out through here, goes all the way out to the toy, and we'll talk about the other end in a second. Comes all the way in, goes through here, comes out here, and then is wound around to secure it, and you can see how big it is. It's a fairly hefty wire. So in order for me to get to this crown gear and brass gear, I would have to unwind this, and hoping it doesn't break, and straighten it enough, all the bends out, so that it would pass through that tube enough for me to at least pivot that tube out of the way so I can get to that gear. Now, that probably won't happen without damage. On the inside of here, that stiff wire is running, through all of this outside wound wire. Does that show up? The wound wire is actually the one that spins. See, when this brass piece rotates, this wound piece connects to that brass, and it's the outside that spins. It's the inside that stays stationary. And inside the toy itself, that stiff inner wire comes in, does a bend upward like that, and doesn't connect to anything. It's just stiff, bends upward, slides inside this upper propeller shaft here, which is got a hollow hole you can see in the top. And basically where this outside part, this spring-like part, is following around, goes into the same tube. They've crimped the tube to try to bite into this outside piece a bit. And that's how they did the right angle. You would have thought they just stuck a couple of gears in there or something, but no, they just literally bent that very stiff cable, and this spring one follows it. So the idea being that when you spin the crank on this end, it's going to spin the blades on this end, and even with that stiff wire, you'll make the satellite rise up in the air. I have my doubts. But as you can see, the problem's going to be that even if I undid this stiff wire at this end and tried to push it back through here so I can get to that gear, That means because that stiff wire has a right angle bend in here, it's not going to push. So I've already looked in here. That's how I know what's going on, and just gently bent these a little because the tabs actually feel like they're just about ready to drop off as is. But basically I would have to free all of this up from that, get it outside the ship, and it's going to be tough. Try to force this stiff wire, the inner core stiff wire, through enough to get back here. Now what would end up probably happening is it's either going to get damaged at this end or this end, and I probably would just have to order a new, generally sell this as piano wire, sell it, get a new wire to replace this one, and obviously salvage this outer one because there's no way you can replace that. So that's the two tough parts of this toy. One is going to be just getting it apart in a way that it can put back together, and the second is going to be trying to do something to replace that worn out gear back there. And normally it would come through and you can see how it's crimped onto the top in between that, and finding a gear that has that nipple on it that hasn't already been crunched, of course, can't be done. You'd have to actually find a vendor that was selling that same gear ready for that and then perform that crimping function. But it might be possible to solder that gear to the crown gear and still have it make a good connection with the crank and gear. Anyway, that'd be the only hopes of repairing the toy. In fact, these two little divots, you see this this little dot here and that little dot there, those are the same type of crimps that they did inside the satellite to bind onto this outside spring part, so that the spring will want to spin when this part spins. Move it a little bit in my hand so maybe you can kind of see the action. But oh, and one more thing, it has to turn in one direction only. If it were to spin in the wrong direction, all these crimp connections, rather than wanting to screw in and stay tight together, would screw out and come loose, especially in the satellite. So they put in this piece right here. You can see this piece of metal comes up and sticks into the teeth of that gear. That's a ratchet, basically. So that gear can only move one way. If you try to force it the other way, it locks up. And that's probably why this thing got damaged in the first place. Kids not always cranking it clockwise to make it work, maybe trying to force it counterclockwise, and of course that's going to lock up and not move. It's going to strip out the gears on the back there because they can't move. And pretty much all of this was bent up when I first opened it up. This back piece was not straight, it was bent, and this ratchet piece you can still see is kind of wobbly. It was all bent up and not connected to the gear any longer. So I mean, it's had a hard life, but then again, it was meant for toys, and that's what kids do. Very strange toy. First thing I'm going to do before I take any of it apart is do some sourcing, see if I can find a brass gear that might be close, according to my eye, because I can't get real good measurements of it while it's still assembled, that might be in the ballpark or that I could drill out or something like that. And if I think I've got a gear in mind that'll work there, I'm going to order a couple off AliExpress too. They sell a lot of brass gears. Then I'll go ahead and attempt to disassemble this whole menagerie. It's like I say, there's no slot here. I can't slip that out, and it's not slotted here. I can't slip that out. Although I suppose that could be an option if a person were to cut a little slot right there to where you could just slip that wire out, which would tip this out of the way. You might be able to get that gear out and then slip everything back in and solder or put a piece of metal across there so that it stays in the correct position. I'll think about it. See, there's lots of things to think about. First thing on my radar, though, is look into the gears that I might have out in my part shop and wait for the gears that I've ordered on AliExpress to arrive so I can actually physically have something to compare to. But a very unusual toy. I've not seen one where the outside sheath is the part that rotates and the inside stays stationary before.